welcome to Language in a Global World, powered by JB Linguistics, where language learning meets culture, business, and the future of communication. I am your host, JB, and today we're going to be exploring how language shapes opportunity, builds international bridges, and prepares individuals and companies for global success. I am the owner and founder of JB Linguistics, and we're going to be learning and talking about different topics throughout our podcast. And one of the topics that we're going to touch on today is why do accents exist and the geography of how we talk. So it's going to be an interesting topic that we're going to go through today. One of the most universal human experiences, noticing that someone sounds different from you, gets almost no explanation in everyday life. This episode, we're going to unpack accents, why they are, why they form, why they persist, and what they reveal about identity, history, and belonging. So we're going to touch into it a little bit. I'm going to tell you guys a time when accents surprised me. In a moment that I became aware of my own accent. When I moved to Germany about 14 years ago, and I didn't know any German. I was integrating myself into a society and a community, and my ear all the time was always listening to German, and I was learning German. I was processing German, but even when people would speak English with me, there was always an accent, and it was one of the first times that I moved myself out of the United States in a non-English speaking country, and I was navigating how to live in another country. And not only was I hearing accents, I was hearing German, different languages, and it was so much processing. For months, I had a chronic headache because I was always trying to process what I was hearing, and it took a long time to not only recognize that I have an accent, recognize that the culture that I was living in was surrounded by different accents as well. And it took me a while, but I adjusted to it eventually. But what is an accent actually? An accent is a set of patterns in how sounds are produced, vowel shapes, consonant placements, rhythm, intonation, and stress. It's an important distinction. Everyone has an accent in the world. It doesn't matter if you're from the United States, from the UK, from India, from Germany, from South Africa. Every single person in the world has an accent. And there's no accentless speech in the world. Only accents that are socially coded as neutral or standard. So it's important to note that no matter where you are geographically, your accent in a cultural society has a different connotation to it. Accents versus dialects. Accents are about pronunciation, whereas dialects include vocabulary, grammar differences as well. So, for instance, an accent in the United States, right? You're gonna have a different accent in the South. You know, people who are from Alabama who are speaking in English, but they're speaking with a different accent is going to be different than someone from New York City, right? Who has a different, more city feel to their accent versus a country feel. Those accents and those ways that we speak the language doesn't define the language as any different. However, it can change the dialect in which the person is speaking, which words they're using, ways that they're approaching conversations and handling the language. So accents and dialect are so important, but they're vastly different from one another. Accents are learned, not inherited. So a baby in Seoul who is raised in Texas speaks with a Texas accent. The biology is neutral. The environment writes the software. So this is very important. So if you are a person who is originally from Germany, grew up in Germany, but you relocated to Australia at some point, and you're raising your kids in Australia, oftentimes those kids are going to have Australian accents. They're not going to have a German accent or a German dialect in the way that they speak. They're going to assimilate to the culture in which they live in. And it's important that we understand the nuances between accent and dialect and the environment that we inherit our accent and dialects from. So it's important that we recognize that. Accents persist, and why do people hold on to them? And this is so interesting. spent most of my, and it's so interesting, I spent most of my adult life in different countries, and yet growing up, I had access to a lot of different languages. I had access to a lot of different dialects and accents, and holding on to native accents and dialects is something that is very normal, but it can also be adapted and changed over time, depending on how long you've lived in a different country, how long you've been speaking with a different accent over time. But ultimately, the neutral place to be a little bit more proactive is challenging yourself to hear the accent that you're living in, hear the accent that you're derived in, and it will ultimately change how you speak a new language, right? And oftentimes when I'm speaking German, I hear people say, well, you sound more French, which is a language that I speak as well. And so the accent can shift and change language to language, and it is very normal. But also the dialect in which I speak German is often very Americanized because I choose a lot of American words and I directly translate that into German. So accent, dialect, influence of culture and neutrality within your environment is going to impact the way that you speak, and it always will. The science of accent perception. This is so interesting. Oftentimes society and people have snap judgments based off of the accent they're hearing. And this is so interesting. If somebody hears a Spanish accent in the United States, it's going to create a snap judgment in people that oftentimes reflects in either a positive or a negative environment. And it's so important that we remove ourselves from the accent that we're working with or that we're hearing, and to remove ourselves from that pre-snap judgments that we have. People are incredibly intelligent from all over the world, from all over different languages and perspectives. And we need to be approaching those intelligent people with intelligent responses that are connective, lack judgment, but are engaging and bring together cultures. Familiarity breeds comprehension. The more exposure you have to an accent, the better you understand it, which has implications for diverse workplaces and classrooms. So this is so important. I think I just mentioned when I first moved to Germany, the first couple months, it took me a long time to adjust myself to understanding and comprehending the environment that I was in. As I became more familiar with the environment, the language, the accent, the culture, the more I became more comfortable with it. And it did diversify my own perspectives, how I approached work in Germany, and how I approached teaching and learning in this environment. So the longer time that you have in that environment, the more that you feel comfortable and the more you adjust yourself to it. Foreign accent syndrome is a real thing, and a rare neurological condition where brain injury caused someone to speak with a perceived foreign accent. This has been so interesting. There's been cases where I think there was a woman in the UK where she was in a car accident and sustained brain trauma from that accident. And as she recovered, she only spoke with an Asian accent, speaking English, but only with an Asian accent, and how that affected her life and her society and how she perceived other people, but also how other people perceived her was completely different. And so it's important to recognize that accent does live in the brain. It is pulled out of the brain by different circumstances, right? Either by an accident or by your environment or the consistency in the environment that you live in. So it's important to recognize that accent can be pulled out, it can be reshaped, it can be sustained over a long period of time. So it's important to recognize that your accent is not derived into one singular perspective or a lane that you have to maintain. It can be fluid and it can be changing. So it's important to recognize these differences but how you navigate your accent. So as we look at this and we navigate how to understand accent and dialect moving into the future, recognize that your environment does shape your accent. Everybody has one. everybody is understood globally from an accent perspective, and we should be approaching accents without prejudgment and allowing accents to and make us diverse and make us a diverse community within how we approach working in a community with other people. So at JB Linguistics, we specialize in small group virtual classes with certified educators and structured learning paths. Whether you're a homeschool family or a working professional in a corporate team, we have flexible programs designed for real progress. To inquire more about language learning, certified testing, and translation services, and here we are building global communication one lesson at a time. Thank you for joining us today.